The trouble started with the pines. 8 towering, scraggly giants that loomed over my little 2-story house like silent sentinels, their branches swaying too close to my roof every time the wind kicked up. After a brutal storm last fall that left half the county without power and a jagged scar across my neighbor's shed, I noticed the trees leaning just a bit more, their roots bulging under the soil like they were itching to rip free. One gusty night, a branch snapped off and crashed through my attic window, showering glass across the floor where my son, Ethan, had been sleeping an hour earlier. That was it. I wasn't waiting for the next storm to turn my home into kindling. I called a licensed arborist the next morning. His name was Tom, a wiry guy with a sunburned neck and a no-nonsense clipboard. He walked the property, poked at the roots with a metal rod, and shook his head. "These pines are a lawsuit waiting to happen," he said. "Fire hazard, too dry as tinder. You got a legal right to remove them under the state's new wildfire codes." I filed a permit with the city that afternoon, and by the end of the week, a crew was out there with chainsaws, turning those looming threats into neat stacks of firewood. I thought I'd handled it responsible, proactive, a mom keeping her kids safe. Then Patricia Hensley showed up. She didn't knock. She just stood on my porch, her shadow falling through the screen door like a vulture perched on a branch. I opened it to find her clutching a clipboard, her oversized tortoiseshell sunglasses sliding down her nose, lips pursed so tight they looked like they'd been stitched shut. Patricia was the president of the Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association, self-appointed dictator of our little cul-de-sac, a woman who'd once fined a widow for planting tulips 2 shades too bright. "You didn't file with us," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She jabbed a manicured finger toward the empty spots where the pines used to stand. "That's a violation of covenant 5.2, preservation of natural aesthetics." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "They were a hazard, Patricia. I filed with the city. Got permits, arborist approval, everything." She tilted her head, giving me that thin, venomous smile that never reached her eyes. "The city doesn't own this neighborhood, Laura." "I do." Before I could argue, she slapped a letter against my chest and marched off, her heels clicking on the pavement like gunfire. I unfolded it right there on the porch. A DULA 28,000 fine for unauthorized landscape alteration, plus a demand to replant 8 trees, 10 to 12 feet tall, from an approved species list. My stomach dropped. I was a single mom, juggling a part-time bookkeeping gig and a 5-year-old with asthma bad enough to keep an inhaler in every room. That kind of money didn't exist in my world, and Patricia knew it. I tried reasoning with her. I sent emails with photos of the cracked branch, the arborist's report, even a polite plea explaining Ethan's health and how I couldn't afford this. No response. I left voicemails, my voice shaking as I begged for a meeting. Silence. I even showed up at the next HOA gathering with a tray of homemade lemon bars, hoping to soften her up. She took one, bit into it, and spat into a napkin. "Too sweet," she said, loud enough for her posse of khaki-clad minions to snicker. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about trees. It was about power. Patricia Hensley had sniffed out my vulnerability, overworked, underfunded, alone, and decided I was her next punching bag. She'd picked the wrong fight. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived, its crisp envelope mocking me from the mailbox. It was a formal notice from the HOA, threatening a lien on my house if I didn't pay the fine or comply by April 10th, less than 2 weeks away. The fine print was a gut punch. DULA 40 a day for noncompliance, stacking up until I either caved or lost everything. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands, while Ethan wheezed softly in the next room, his nebulizer humming like a dying engine. Rage settled in, cold and sharp. Patricia thought I was a pushover, a tired mom too buried in bills and doctor's appointments to fight back. She had no idea who I'd been. Before Ethan was born, before his dad walked out and left me with a mortgage and a broken heart, I'd spent 6 years as a paralegal for a cutthroat real estate firm in Raleigh. I didn't just file papers. I dissected contracts, hunted loopholes, and watched attorneys dismantle shady HOAs for breakfast. I let my certification lapse when Ethan's lungs started failing. But the knowledge? That never left me. I wasn't just a mom with a chainsaw eye, was a woman who knew how to bury someone like Patricia in her own rules. I went to war quietly. First, I pulled the HOA bylaws from a dusty binder I'd kept from the day I moved in. Then I cross-referenced them with North Carolina property law, the city's zoning updates, and the wildfire mitigation statutes Tom had mentioned. It took 2 sleepless nights, fueled by black coffee and spite, but I found gold. Covenant 5.2c hadn't been updated since 2018, before the state overrode local restrictions on hazard removals. Patricia's precious rule was a legal corpse unenforceable. Better yet, the bylaws required a board vote and 30 days notice for fines overdue law $2,500. She'd skip both. That due law $28,000 demand? Dead on arrival. I could have stopped there, fired off a letter, and watched her squirm. But I didn't want her humbled, I wanted her gone. So I got creative. I started attending every HOA meeting, sitting in the back with a notepad, saying nothing. Patricia strutted around like a peacock, barking orders, ignoring motions from the floor, and steamrolling anyone who dared question her. I watched her break Robert's rules of order so many times I lost count. Then I struck. At the next meeting, I raised my hand and asked, "Can you show us the minutes where 5.2c was last amended? Or the vote authorizing my fine? Was counsel consulted before you threatened to lean?" Her face twitched, her cronies shifted uncomfortably, and one board member, a nervous guy named Carl, muttered, "Do we need a lawyer for this?" Patricia cornered me after, her fake smile stretched tight as a drum. "You're quite the expert, Laura," she said, her voice dripping acid. I met her gaze and smiled back. I should be. Before Ethan got sick, I worked for Grayson Vaholchino, the firm that bankrupts HOAs for sport. Her eyes widened, just for a second, before she recovered. "This isn't over," she hissed and stormed off. She had no idea how right she was. Her next move was predictable: retaliation. Suddenly, I had concerned neighbors knocking on my door, HOA loyalists with tight smiles and vague warnings about community standards. A flyer appeared in every mailbox, decrying reckless residents who threatened property values. Then Carl let slip over coffee that Patricia was pushing the board to vote on foreclosing my house at the next meeting. Foreclosure. Over trees. That's when I decided to stop playing defense. I've been researching revenge options when I stumbled across it. Philostake's aurea, golden bamboo. Not a tree, technically a grass, but it met her height requirement and it spread like a plague. I called a nursery an hour away, confirmed they had 6 12-foot stalks in stock, and hired a landscaper to plant them along my property line, right where it kissed Patricia's pristine backyard. I filed the plan with the city, got it stamped, and even added a row of solar lanterns to make it look HOA chic. By the time Patricia noticed, the bamboo was in the ground, its roots already scheming underground. She showed up 2 weeks later, clipboard in hand, face red as a fire hydrant. "This isn't a tree," she screeched. "It's a weed." I leaned against my porch railing, sipping iced tea. "It's a privacy screen, Patricia. Approved by the State Botanical Society. Want the receipts?" She sputtered, but she couldn't touch me. I'd followed her rules to the letter. Within a month, bamboo shoots were creeping under a fence. By 6 weeks, they'd cracked her deck. By 2 months, they'd choked her sprinkler system, sending muddy water gushing into her garage. She screamed so loud I heard it through my kitchen window. Repair estimate. Due law $15,000. Insurance? Denied. She tried to pin it on me, but my paper trail was bulletproof: permits, emails, compliance sign-offs. She demanded aesthetic integrity, and I delivered it in spades. Patricia didn't quit. She rammed through an emergency HOA rule banning invasive plants without a vote or notice. Naturally then showed up with a contractor and a shovel, ready to rip out my bamboo. I met her on the lawn with a cease and desist letter, my old paralegal license number glaring from the top. "You're trespassing," I said calmly, dialing the sheriff on speaker. When Deputy Ramirez arrived, I handed him a stack of EVY Denke thicker than a phone book. Patricia ranted about neighborhood ruin, but Ramirez just looked at her and asked, "Ma'am, Did you know she's trained in property law? Her jaw dropped. Then I played my ace. A petition to recall her, signed by 72 Fan Tram of Pinewood Estates. Weeks of quiet door-knocking with Ethan in tow, explaining her abuses had paid off. The bamboo in their yards helped too. The recall vote was unanimous. Patricia was out, but the story didn't end there. The new board, led by a soft-spoken retiree named Ellen, ordered an audit. I volunteered, digging through years of records while Ethan napped upstairs. We found due law $12,000 spent on non-existent streetlights, due law $6,800 funneled to Patricia's brother-in-law for consulting, and a due law $4,000 event budget traced to a luxury spa weekend. It wasn't sloppiness, it was theft. I filed a complaint with the state, attached the audit, and watched the dominoes fall. Lawsuits sprouted from other homeowners. The DA opened a fraud case. Last I heard, Patricia was dodging process servers, her house listed with a disclosure about invasive root damage and pending litigation. No takers. The HOA dissolved 3 months, later voted out of existence by a fed-up neighborhood. We celebrated with a block party, ribs, music, a piñata shaped like Patricia's clipboard. Ellen wore a shirt that said, "Roots win." My bamboo? It's a lush wall now, trimmed neat, glowing with lanterns. Ethan loves it, calls it the jungle. And me? I hung a sign on my porch. Mess with my roots, and they'll dig your grave. Patricia thought she'd break me. She never saw the forest for the trees. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.